Okay, this is a video about cognitive science, particularly about the work of John Vervaeke, who is a professor at the University of Toronto, not far from where I live. John put up a YouTube series of 50 episodes called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis back in 2019. I haven't watched quite all of them yet, but today I'll be focusing on episode 26, which is titled Cognitive Science. But first I want to introduce his idea of the meaning crisis by means of the scientific worldview. And he really captured this well in his TED Talk from 2018. So here's a clip from that talk.
You see, as the mind has been fragmented, so have we. And our self-understanding has been fragmented. Modern science has created this amazing worldview, but we don't fit in it. We're homeless. Do you understand why? Look, you know the one thing that we don't have a scientific explanation of is how we produce scientific explanations. You know why? Because that requires an integrated account of the mind. We don't fit into the scientific worldview. That's led to a crisis. We're fragmented and we're disconnected from the worldview that we've generated. I call this, with the work I've done with some of my fellow co-authors, the meaning crisis.
So John is telling us that modern science has created this amazing worldview, but we don't fit in it. We're homeless. My proposal in this video is very simple. To find our home in the scientific worldview, we must focus on the persons who are doing science. And I'll be doing two parts in this video. The first will be a theoretical description of this proposal, and part two will be a demonstration of it in the context of episode 26. But let me just say here, I don't have anywhere close to the scientific and professional experience of John. I have a master's in philosophy and undergrad in biology. I have one peer-reviewed article by the University of Toronto, but again, nowhere close to what John has accomplished. This channel is just my way of sharing ideas in a public space. I'm very much a student, so please hit me with the objections and the criticisms. That's kind of what I'm here for. So cognitive science is an area I never really thought about much before I listened to John talk. And his description of it, his definition of what cognitive science is, really was persuasive for me. He breaks it down into levels and disciplines. And the basic idea is that the levels, culture, language, behavior, information processing in the brain, are causally connected and interconnected, but the disciplines that study these levels or concepts do not show this interconnectedness. And this is what he calls the problem of fragmentation.
One of the things that is missing, that we are ignorant of in this model, is this. These various levels of reality causally impact and constrain each other in very important ways. These individual disciplines don't capture that. That's why there's this constant temptation and need to create the hybrids, like psycholinguistics. So, how are we going to study, therefore, the relationship between the levels? We have to get the disciplines to hybridize, or beyond that, to talk to each other, to integrate together in some fashion. If we're going to deal with that ignorance, and that has to be an astute practice. We can't just integrate by equivocating. No integration through equivocation, because that's just bullshitting. So what we have to do is we have to have a philosophically astute integration. We need philosophy precisely because philosophy is the discipline that has us take conceptual care to try and articulate the meaning of our terms, to try and bridge, because that's what philosophy does. It tries to bridge between these different vocabularies, these different ontologies, these different methodologies. That's what philosophy does. Philosophy isn't about sitting around in cafes, smoking cigarettes, and saying vaguely obscure things. Now, the discipline that tries to come up with a philosophically astute integration between these disciplines so that we can avoid equivocation and deal with fragmentation and overcome the ignorance of the causal relationship between the levels. That's cognitive science. That's what cognitive science is.
So what I'm proposing is that we shift our focus from the fragmentation across levels to fragmentation across people. There's an ignorance of what makes them generators of science, or what makes them people who contribute to the ecology of scientific practices. I've put these names here: John Vervaeke, Stephen Wolfram, Robert Fludd, Buckminster Fuller, and Alfred North Whitehead, because I'll be talking about them later in this video, but you could feasibly put anyone in this table who's contributed to some discipline in a meaningful way. It's the same problem of fragmentation, it's just been sort of reoriented to the people who are doing science. And the solution to fragmentation is what's called synoptic integration.
That's the vision of cognitive science as synoptic integration. Synoptic integration is not saying that all the disciplines are saying the same thing. It's not saying that. But it's not simple eclecticism of, well, they're all saying different things, but let's get them all to be friendly and like each other, and they can have some sort of peripheral influence on each other. Synoptic integration is saying, no, we need to build something, right, between the disciplines that addresses the equivocation, deals with the fragmentation, and fills in the ignorance, tells us about how the levels are actually causally interacting and constraining each other. That's synoptic integration.
What I'm claiming in this video is that the synoptic integration of individuals in general depends on the prior integration of these two individuals in particular, Johannes Kepler and Robert Fludd. The fragmentation across them from the early 17th century is perpetuating itself and causing fragmentation across these people today. Bear with me as I explain my reasoning here. It will all come back to John's lecture. Wolfgang Pauli was a true scientific genius, and I think he was extremely sensitive to the meaning crisis in the wake of quantum physics. His friend and colleague Werner Heisenberg attributed this quote to him: "It's all bound to end in tears," and that's always stuck with me. Pauli went searching for answers in the history of science and found the Kepler-Fludd polemic. He wrote an essay about it in 1952. Here's the main idea. Not only in alchemy, but the heliocentric idea furnishes an instructive example of the problem as to how the process of knowing is connected with the religious experience of transmutation undergone by him who acquires knowledge. This connection can only be comprehended through symbols, which both imaginatively express the emotional aspect of the experience and stand in vital relationship to the sum total of human knowledge and the actual process of cognition. I've added these emphases here. Pauli was searching for that connection vocabulary, the bridging vocabulary for synoptic integration. And this idea of symbols that stand in vital relationship to the sum total of knowledge and the actual process of cognition is an idea that I'll be coming back to later. But the main reason why I'm convinced that Pauli was on the right track with this is that the Kepler-Fludd polemic was expressed metaphorically by Kepler and Fludd themselves. And as John will tell us, in cognitive science, metaphors have unprecedented power.
Our brains actually, since the Upper Paleolithic transition, we've been training them and developing them and enculturating them to get very good at bridging between domains. Even the word bridge exemplifies what I'm referring to, namely metaphor. We use metaphor as a way of bridging between domains. I am not about to make the argument that science is metaphor. That is not what's happening here. Okay? But I'm trying to use metaphor as a way of saying that there's already a cognitive ability in us that we can exact and make use of in cognitive science. Look at how a metaphor works. Okay, if I say to you, and Sam is a human being, if I say to you, Sam is a pig, right? Notice what you have to do in order to make this work. So it looks like I'm creating an identity claim. Sam is a pig. But of course, what makes it a metaphor is it's not an identity claim. I can't use this as a way of telling you that Sam has pink skin and he lives on a farm and he's going to be eaten by other human beings someday. Okay, that's not what I mean. I mean something like he's gluttonous or he's, sexually selfish or something like that, right? So notice what I have to do. I have to keep the two different while also saying how they're importantly the same. Now, why am I doing that? Because the difference, right? The difference gets me outside of here's my framing of Sam, and the difference gets me outside of my framing of Sam, and I look through this. I look through, if you'll allow me, the framing of something as a pig, and I use this to look and see something in Sam, a way in which they're identical. So I step back through the difference, but I look through into the identity, and I see things in Sam through my pig lenses, if you'll allow the metaphor, and it allows me to see and understand Sam in a different way. It alters what I consider salient in Sam. It restructures.
So the metaphor of the Kepler-Fludd polemic is as follows. Fludd wrote, "Kepler has hold of the tail, I grasp the head. I perceive the first cause, he its effects." In response, Kepler wrote, "I hold the tail, but I hold it in my hand. You may grasp the head mentally, though only I fear in your dreams. I am content with the effects." I've visualized the metaphor here, the head grabbing and the tail grabbing, and I've named them quaternarian and trinitarian constructs, which I'll explain in a moment. But to visualize my claim here and to refine it somewhat, what I'm saying is that there's some kind of 3-4 meta-construct that is sufficiently profound for the synoptic integration across individuals in general, not just for Fludd and Kepler. This is not a knowledge claim, this is a conjecture. Based on the information that I have, I think that this construct is plausible. Part of the power of cognitive science that John really illustrates well in his lecture is that you can give technical definitions for phrases like sufficiently profound. This isn't a way of just bullshitting. To be sufficiently profound means to be powerful and unbiased. These are characteristics of constructs. So now we need to understand what the nature of a construct is.
People, of course, really like ideas that are multi-apt, right? Here's my idea, my thesis, my proposal, some model, whatever kind of construct I'm using, and it's multi-apt in that, I can use it and it can bridge to this domain and this, I can go into these many different domains, I can do this insightful connecting and transfer. You see, we also want that these constructs are produced in a certain way. Not just that this is how they're used, but this is how they're produced, right? This is their forward orientation, this is their backward orientation. We want a construct that has been produced by many convergent, right, independent lines of investigation. You see, if I'm getting all of my information just through one channel, there's a very good chance that this thing is being produced by bias, by distortion in that channel. But if I'm getting the same thing produced from multiple independent channels, right, there's a very good chance that it's not being produced by the bias or distortion in any one of these. There's a very good chance that the relative biases and distortions cancel each other out. So by doing convergence, I get bias reduction. And man, does that matter, for overcoming the way in which we bullshit ourselves with salience. So convergence gives me bias reduction, what Rescher calls trustworthiness. Now, trustworthiness isn't truth. It's not certainty. This, by the way, is why science likes numbers. Scientists like numbers not because we're fascists or because we don't appreciate the artistic beauty of blah, 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 blah. We like numbers because they give us this. Look, you can see 3. You can hear 3. You can touch 3. Numbers afford convergence and they boost trustworthiness, they help to reduce bias. And remember, I've tried to argue that the scientific method of experimentation is a method, right, in which we are trying, the scientific method of experimentation and observation are methods, psychotechnologies in which we're trying to reduce bias, reduce the way in which we're deceiving, how we're coming up with our constructs. And so this is what you're trying to do in cognitive science. You're always trying to create these constructs that are high in plausibility. When I get something that is extremely trustworthy, that is balanced with powerful multi-aptness, then I think that's what we mean when we say something is profound. It's the exact opposite of the deepity, the triviality, the conspiracy, the Motte and Bailey bullshit. It's profound. Now, being profound doesn't mean it's true. Being profound means it's very reasonable and it should be taken very seriously.
So constructs have these qualities of multi-aptness, trustworthiness, and profundity, which is something like the balancing or the plausibility of them. I've represented the 3-4 metaconstruct here with the cube octahedron for now, but the idea is that the 3-4 metaconstruct is what makes these people multi-apt within their respective domains. It's what allowed Vervaeke to become a cognitive scientist, or what allows Wolfram to do ruleology in his particular way. These are individuals who have balanced the metaphor of the Kepler-Fludd polemic in their own lives, in their own personal way. And it's not like they can just tell us how to do that. One way to think of this is that these are people who have found their own kind of home in the scientific worldview, but that does not necessarily mean that they can explain how everyone can get there collectively. It's a much wider cultural problem. The great advantage of the Kepler-Fludd metaphor is that it's expressed in numerical terms. To see how this works, we'll be looking at the Trinitarian construct as the lens that is either similar to or different than the subject, which is the Quaternarian construct. And let's start now then by taking a closer look at Kepler's work. Kepler, of course, is famous for providing the first mathematical demonstration and really the most definitive proof of heliocentrism. These are the kinds of diagrams that you'll find in his magnum opus, Harmony of the World. These are astronomical aspects, and they use the line, the point, and the circumference to basically approximate the mind of God, which is realized as the spheres in astronomy. And this is perfectly fine for science. This worked for Kepler. But Pauli noted something important. He said, in view of Kepler's conflict with Fludd, it's important that Kepler's symbol contains no hint of the number 4, or quaternity. For him, the number 4 has no symbolical character whatsoever. Fludd noticed this and wrote an explicit defense of the number 4 against Kepler. Here, the dignity of the quaternary number will be discussed, and I shall defend it with might and main as far as my weak intellect allows, spurred on by the insolence of Kepler. So what was Fludd drawing? Well, Fludd was making images like this. And from kind of an anthropological viewpoint, this was the work of someone who was trying to understand their own cognition, to really get a peek behind the curtain and see what was going on in their own head. It's very interesting from that point of view. However, Kepler noticed that this was not science. Kepler was not convinced that we could actually have knowledge like this. And this quote here is from an earlier letter before Kepler interacted with Fludd, but I think it captures the spirit of his criticism. I too play with symbols, but I play in such a way that I do not forget that I am playing. For nothing is proved by symbols, things already known are merely fitted to them. Unless by sure reasons it can be demonstrated that they are not merely symbolic, but are descriptions of the ways in which the two things are connected, and of the causes of these connections. So, Kepler's right. The quaternarian construct is self-justifying. It doesn't have a tail to hold on to, but that does not mean that it is inevitably compromised by bias, or that it's not trustworthy inherently. Kepler's criticism is accurate, but it only shows the difference between the Trinitarian construct and Fludd's quaternarian viewpoint, we need to see how they're similar. We need to use the Trinitarian construct to show the similarity between it and the quaternarian construct. That's what I propose to do now in part 2 of my video. I'll be moving on to a demonstration of this. And the only way I think I can do that is to explain to you the process of my cognition as I was watching John's video about cognitive science. So I'll kind of be narrating how I thought of this the first time and the structure of my intuition as I listened to John's lecture. This is the final part of episode 26, where John starts talking about the Simon and Newell model of general problem solving. So we'll start there.
We're going to try and analyze a problem down into 4 basic features, and we'll end today's episode with that.
So he's already priming us for a quaternarian construct. He's going to bring it down to 4 things. So this is priming my intuition, at least, to look for some kind of fourfold structure.
Newell and Simon basically said, what is it to have a problem? A problem is when there's a difference between the state you're in, which they called your initial state, and the state you want to be in. This is your goal state. So I have a problem when there's a significant difference between those. For example, I'm thirsty, right? And I don't want to be thirsty. And those aren't the same thing. Things have to change in the world and in me for the difference between the initial state and the goal state to go away. So part of what I have to do when I solve a problem is the system has to be able to represent, we'll have to come back to how we're going to use that term, the initial state and the goal state. And then there are actions, operations I can perform that will change the state I'm initially into some other state. So for example, part of the problem I had was I'm over here and the glass is over here. So one of the things I can do is I can walk towards the glass. From here, perhaps I can do 2 other operations, right? From here, maybe 3. From here, maybe only 1, and so on and so forth, right?
So at this point, I'm already starting to get some structures appearing in my intuition about what this could be, but John still has to tell us about one more thing.
So far I've got, right, 3 things that I'm analyzing problem solving into. Initial state, a goal state, and operators that can transform one state into another state. There's one other thing I have. I have what are called path constraints. You see, I'm a general problem solver. I don't want to find just any solution. Solving a problem is this. It's to have a sequence of operations that will transform the initial state into the goal state while obeying the path constraints, preserving me as a general problem solver. That's what it is to solve a problem. And this is called the problem space, or sometimes called the search space.
So during that section, I was thinking of these structures. These can all be thought of as problem spaces. In Fludd's case, we have an initial state, a goal state, these are the operators, and then there are 4, perhaps 8 path constraints. Wolfram's pattern starts from an initial condition and doesn't have a clear terminal goal condition, but the path constraints have directionality between the operators. Fuller's model is repeating initial state, goal state, initial state in 3D space with closest packed spheres, and again has this 4 or 8-fold path constraint pattern that Fludd's has. This diagram from Whitehead's commentator Sherburne is a goal state and an initial state where the operators are somehow embedded within them. One of the advantages of thinking of these structures in terms of general problem spaces is that it helps to separate the scientific theory in which they're embedded from the person who designed the pattern. These are symbols, fundamentally, that stand in a vital relationship to the sum total of human knowledge and the actual process of cognition for that person who thought them up. This is as true for Kepler's diagrams as it is for these ones here. And you might say, well, what makes Kepler's pattern special is that he was able to match them to the observations of planetary motion. And that's true, but it emphasizes the difference, not the similarity. To find the similarity, we have to look at how these patterns all match something in their respective domains. This is Fludd's symbol for generation and corruption. This is Wolfram's symbol for the experience of space-time within a mobile cellular automaton. This is Fuller's symbol for a lot of things, but gravity and radiation in synergetics. And this is Whitehead's symbol for the process of concrescence between two actual entities. And this, as you can tell, is combinatorially explosive. The complexity is indefinite. And maybe this is where distributed cognition would have to play a role. That being said, I've spent a lot of my own time looking at this seeming coincidence between Fuller's fourfold path constraints and Fludd's fourfold path constraints. Why do they both have this similar approach to problem solving when there's no indication that Fuller ever read Fludd or knew anything about him? I've explored this in considerable detail in some of my other videos, but I want to just close this video with one more demonstration that I think this is evidence of a conscious recognition of the quaternarian construct within their cognition. I think they knew that this construct needed to be perceived and realized through what John is going to call the process of relevance realization. This is the start of episode 27, but it continues on from 26.
For very, very many problems, the problems are combinatorially explosive, and therefore you cannot search the space. You do not have the time, the machinery, the resources to search the whole space. If this is the whole problem space, this is what you do somehow. You can't search the whole space. And I mean, you can't look here and then reject. Because if you look at this part of the space and reject it, and then look at this part of it, then you end up searching the whole space. It's not a matter of checking and rejecting, because that's to search the whole space. What you do is somehow do this. You somehow zero in on only a very small subsection of that whole space, and you search in there, and you often find a solution. You somehow zero in on the relevant information, and you make that information, right, effective in your cognition. You do what I call relevance realization. You realize what's relevant.
So this immediately calls to mind for me this diagram from Fludd's work as well. I've inverted it here. John's also drawn a circle with this little slice, even the arrow coming in from outside. For Fludd, this is the formal pyramid. The number 4 is out here with the triangle coming in. I've highlighted it. Again, the structure of my intuition follows these patterns that, for me, just really click. So I'll give you a few more extra things. There's a lot I can say about relevance realization. I just have 2 points to close this out here. So first, Buckminster Fuller has the same fourfold concentric hierarchy model for relevance realization. Here are 3 examples. I go into these in my video on synergetics and quantum physics a little bit. Check that out. It goes into detail there. For Fludd, number 2, the key thing with this image is that there's a triangle. It's the Trinitarian construct. This is how unbalanced the metaphor is. Kepler has no representation of the quaternarian construct at all, but Fludd has the Trinitarian. Here's how this works. The 2 pyramids, matter and form, are overlapping, but only 3 of their regions exist in the same spheres. The foundation, or the base of each, is excluded from combination. And the viewpoint here is that you can't have matter without form, and you can't have form without matter. So when it comes to observing effects and doing science, we only have these 3 regions to work with. That's where the Trinitarian construct comes from. So the question there is, okay, what's the problem then? Why can't we just have the Trinitarian and quaternarian constructs work together? Why isn't the 3-4 metaconstruct readily available to our cognition if it's just as simple as this? Where's the conflict? So now this really is my conclusion. I want to use one more image from Fludd's works to show you what I mean. In this image is a representation of the Christian Trinity. This is God the Father outside here, represented by the Tetragrammaton. The Son of God is the man standing here, and the Holy Spirit is the sphere of equality with the Son and the heart running through the center, where matter and form are equal. The fourth aspect is this dark lower half of the microcosm, the night of the microcosm. Everything else is in rational conscious awareness. Now, the way that Carl Jung expresses this relationship is in terms of the four functions of consciousness. In this example, thinking, the superior function, occupies the center of the light half of the circle, whereas feeling, the inferior function, occupies the dark half. And then you have two auxiliary functions on the side. Whichever conscious aspect is most developed in the individual will have a complementary, undifferentiated conscious aspect. And this is part of what individuation is about. It's about realizing which aspect of your consciousness that is, and then integrating it as best you can. So this is why the 3-4 meta construct is not readily available to our cognition. But what about on a cultural level? What about the meaning crisis in general? This is a normative question. It asks, how should we integrate these constructs in a way that will work for everyone, not just for individuals? And again, I'm going to rely on Jung here with a quote from his essay, A Psychological Approach to the Dogma of the Trinity. He writes, "The Pythagorean quaternity was a natural phenomenon, an archetypal image, but it was not yet a moral problem, let alone a divine drama. Therefore, it went underground. It was a purely naturalistic, intuitive idea, born of the nature-bound mind. The gulf that Christianity opened out between nature and spirit enabled the human mind to think not only beyond nature, but in opposition to it, thus demonstrating its divine freedom, so to speak. This flight from the darkness of nature's depths culminates in Trinitarian thinking, which moves in a Platonic supra-celestial realm. But the question of the fourth, rightly or wrongly, remained. It stayed down to below, and from there threw up the heretical notion of the quaternity and the speculations of Hermetic philosophy." This diagram's also from that essay, Find the Odd One Out, Father, Son, Spirit, and the Devil. This is a huge problem. These are a couple quotes that Jung uses in his essay as well. The opening line of the Timaeus, 1, 2, 3, but where's the fourth? In Faust, 3 we brought with us, the fourth would not come, he was the right one who thought for them all. And my personal take or view on this is from the Pauli Jung conjecture, again from that essay, and it has to do with synchronicity. So from a scientific point of view, right, putting aside the psychology and the mythology and the religion, what can we do in the scientific worldview? This is my sort of basic prescription for that. In science, we take space-time seriously. A lot of scientists take energy seriously as a concept. You can't do science without causality. But where are the scientists who take synchronicity seriously? Is it possible? What truly prevents synchronicity from attaining a place in the scientific worldview alongside space-time energy and causality? Why can't we add the fourth in? What stops us? This is my take on what we should do about the meaning crisis, and I think that this is sort of the first step towards realizing the 3-4 meta construct as a conjecture. We need to learn how to optimize and benefit from our interpretations of synchronicity, and that's why I make videos about it on my channel. But this brings my video to a close. Please leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.